Today is World Mental Health Day. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is hoping to curb suicide rates by awarding hundreds of millions of dollars in grants to promote prevention. $232.2 million in grants will go to help local communities build out capacity for the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Additional grants will help with suicide prevention efforts in colleges and also to reach those harder to reach populations. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, suicide is one of the leading causes of death in the country. Nearly 50,000 people died by suicide last year, and that's a 2.5% increase from the prior year. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry says rates of suicide among black youth have risen faster than in any other racial or ethnic group. The suicide rate for black boys between the ages of 10 and 19, it's risen 60% in the last 2 decades. Black children and early adolescents are twice as likely to die by suicide than their white counterparts. Joining me now to discuss this is Ryan Mundy. He's a former NFL player and the founder of Alchemy, a mental health app specifically designed for the black community. My brother, so good to see you again. Welcome back to the Grill. I'm looking at this rise in suicide rates in black boys, and it is depressing. It is stunning to me. What do you think is behind it?
Yeah, thanks for having me on again. It's always a pleasure to discuss what's going on in our community as it relates to mental health and wellness, but specifically as it relates to young black boys and also black men. I think we're in a space now of needing a space. We don't have the outlets to necessarily express how we're feeling. We don't have the language and understanding to even articulate how we're feeling. And a lot of times that builds up to not having the agency or feeling like you have a space to communicate that. As I like to say, sometimes it feels like there's no country for black men and also black boys, right? Where we go out into the world and we're looked at as like these physical specimens, particularly in the sports and entertainment realm. And then we're always fighting these tensions, whether they be in our communities, with the gun violence and also in corporate America with discrimination, et cetera. We're getting pulled and tugged in a bunch of different directions. And I think all of that is building up inside. And ultimately, there's no outlet for that. And we don't have the agency, we don't have the language, we don't have the experience to know where to go and how to get these things out of us. And ultimately, when you have too much of that in you, then those mental health issues that you talked about, those statistics, they really start to jump and rise.
It's a really interesting moment because I hear more and more parents say, I didn't know my kid was going through something. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know what to look for. What are some signs that we should be looking for that a child might be depressed? And does it present maybe differently in kids than it does for grown folk?
It definitely presents differently than in children than it does in adults, but particularly just really having that conversation and really having that open dialogue. For me and my wife, we're particularly mindful about how we speak to our kids because a lot of times we can speak in such a way where we are prompting them to give the answer for us. But asking open-ended questions, more specific questions outside of just, how was your day, being very detailed. What did you do today? What did you eat for lunch? So on and so forth. And just really starting to notice their responses and really the response pattern over a period of time. The thing about depression is, it's an accumulation, and it's not necessarily just like, oh, today I'm depressed and it happened all of a sudden. It's a buildup. And so there's a series of events that happens throughout a period of time that ultimately get one to a depressive state. But ultimately, again, just thinking about being very, very mindful about kids and their responses and their engagement in environments. And the last thing I'll say about that, it's particularly hard to be a parent in this day and age, in this digital era, for folks like myself, upper millennials. We didn't grow up with a lot of technology and iPads in our hand. And so it's a whole different world of understanding how to communicate and also relate and connect with our children in just this highly virtual environment. But again, making sure that we're communicating effectively and also just getting them outside and getting their bodies moving, I think does a world of difference.
Absolutely. Now, the other piece of this is stigma. There's a lot of stigma about seeking mental health treatment. The black community is not immune to that stigma. In fact, we may have it worse in some cases. How do we overcome that?
We just got to have the conversation. We have to have the conversation. We have to understand that, look, we're not doing this alone. And that was really my story. If I'm going through it, then shoot, you must be going through it too. How about we talk about it? And that takes an element of courage, but that also takes relationship and that takes trust. And that's ultimately what Alchemy represents, is a brand that you can come to and build relationship and build trust, but also the community members. Like, where can you go? Where's your outlet to have those conversations? And then after the conversation, we just, quite frankly, need more resources. We need more spaces. We need more platforms like Alchemy out in the world that are principally focused on serving our community. But the first step is just having that conversation, having a trusted friend. I said, those spaces where you can go to like get things out, because what doesn't get out of you ultimately builds up. And there's a great book called The Body Keeps Score. And all of our traumas, all of our stressors, everything is just accumulation. And if we're not getting that stuff out, either verbally or through exercise or engaging in community, then that is a recipe for disaster.
Real quick before we go, what are some mental health resources that people can check out? Where should we go?
Starting out with Alchemy, alchemyhealth.com. As you mentioned, we're a mental health and wellness platform focused on the Black community. We provide mental health video courses that show up as workshops, master classes. We have meditations on our platform, and we also host live events and workshops. But we're not alone in our efforts. There's a lot of great platforms out there, such as Therapy for Black Girls. There's other resources, 988, if you're on the far end of the spectrum as it relates to suicide and needing direct support and talking and getting connected to a licensed professional. There's a lot of great communities online as well, and on Instagram.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to check all those things out. We're going to keep supporting you, brother, because we love what you're doing for our community. Ryan Mundy, former NFL player and founder of Alchemy, a mental health app specifically for the Black community.